Hello, America, my fellow Americans, patriots, men, women of this beautiful country that we have. Happy Independence Day weekend. I figured I would get a message out here today to discuss and talk about what independence truly means. And the only real way to do that is to go through the Declaration of Independence. Some of you have done it. Some of you haven't. Some of you, this will be the first time that you ever hear the Declaration of Independence. But I'm going to spend the 5 minutes that it takes. I'm going to read this entire decree to you. In essence, this is a divorce paperwork to the King of England. We were crying for freedom. We had expressed and utilized every box of freedom that we could have. And this was our last effort to get our freedom and liberty. And we explained to the king, as you'll see, why we thought we deserved it. You'll also see in this that what the king was using against the American people was Romans 13. Obey the government, because that was ordained by God. And our founders looked at that and said, no, that's not how it is. You'll see a direct correlation to what we see today in our churches to what we saw back then. And what I mean by that is today, our churches tell us that we need to love one another. We need to do, all the things that we should be doing as humans. But we are far from what we are supposed to do when it comes to Romans 13. Romans 13, we're supposed to do as the government says, but that is as long as it follows suit with what God's will is for us. And our founders saw that that is not the case. And you'll hear that in this Declaration of Independence. And so we said that resistance to tyranny is obedience to God. That's us back in 1776. Resistance to tyranny is obedience to God. Today, I feel that for the last few decades, if not longer, maybe even the last 200 years, we have slowly morphed that message into something that says, tolerance of evil or tyrants is showing the love of Jesus. And it states in the Bible 3 times, and you've heard me say this in other videos and other podcasts I've been in, that if you love God, you hate evil. And that is in the Bible 3 times. And so resistance to tyranny, something that's taking away your liberty, your freedom, that is obedience to God's rule. To fall behind Romans 13 and to stop gathering at church, to stop speaking up against the mandates that are coming against us, to stop doing all of the things that we know in our hearts are right, and we know that are in the Bible is telling us what we should be doing as good men and women of God. That is not obedience to God unless we are standing for our freedoms against the evil that is coming after us. And you see it every day. Our borders, the Supreme Court rulings, what our states are doing, different states, what's happening with inflation, what's happening with food shortages, what's happening all over the place. If we're still supposed to follow this government into oblivion, I can tell you with 100% surety that is not where God wanted us to go. And that is not where our founding fathers wanted us to go, and that's why the Declaration of Independence and then the Constitution shortly after that. So we're going to dive into this, and I wanted to get that message to you, and I'll let the Declaration of Independence speak for itself. And there's going to be a call to action at the end of this. I'm going to also tell a little bit of story as we're all looking at the flags and we're singing the national anthem this weekend. Do you know really where the Star Spangled Banner came from? Do you know the story behind that? Because they don't teach that anymore either. So I'm going to do that as well at the end of this conversation. And we're going to have some fun with it. So I'm going to read the Declaration of Independence to you here, and we're going to enjoy it and just listen to it. And I'm going to read it here. So here we are. So in Congress, July 4th, 1776, the unanimous declaration of the 13 United States of America. When in the course of human events it becomes necessary for one people to dissolve the political bands which have connected them with another, and to assume among the powers of the earth the separate and equal station to which the laws of nature and of nature's God intend them, a decent respect to the opinions of mankind requires that they should declare the causes which impel them to the separation. There's the divorce I was talking about. We hold these truths to be self-evident, that all men are created equal, that they are endowed by their Creator with certain inalienable rights, that among these are life, liberty, and the pursuit of happiness, that to secure these rights, governments are instituted among men, deriving their just powers from the consent of the governed, that whenever any form of government becomes destructive of these ends, it is the right of the people to alter or to abolish it, and to institute new government, laying its foundation on such principles and organizing its powers in such form as to them shall seem most likely to elect their safety and happiness. Prudence, indeed, will dictate that governments long established should not be changed for light and transient causes, and accordingly all experience has shown that mankind are more disposed to suffer while evils are sufferable than to right themselves by abolishing the forms to which they are accustomed. But when a long train of abuses and usurpations, pursuing invariably the same object, evinces a design to reduce them under absolute despotism, it is their right, the people's right, it is their duty to throw out or off such government and to provide new guards for their future and security. Such has been the patience and endurance and suffering of these colonies, and such is now the necessity which constrains them to alter their former system of government. So basically they're saying, we want to divorce the king. The history of the present king of Great Britain is a history of repeated injuries, usurpations, all having in direct object the establishment of an absolute tyranny over these states. To prove this, let facts be submitted to a candid world. So they're going to go through and they're going to list out all of the wrongdoings. They're basically being the soapbox of freedom. They're expressing the jury box of freedom. So freedom of speech, so they're going through their boxes of freedom here and trying to bring to light what is actually going on in the world. And so here are some of the charges they're placing against the king. And I'm going to read through these here for you. So back to it. He has refused his assent to laws, the most wholesome and necessary for the public good. So he's not following the law. He has forbidden his governors to pass laws of immediate and pressing importance, unless suspended in their operation till his assent should be obtained. And when so suspended, he has utterly neglected to attend to them. He has refused to pass other laws for the accommodation of large districts of people, unless those people would relinquish the right of representation in the legislature, a right inestimable to them and formidable to tyrants only. He has called together legislative bodies at places unusual, uncomfortable, and distant from the depository of their public records for the sole purpose of fatiguing them into compliance with his measures. He has dissolved representative houses repeatedly for opposing with manly firmness his invasions on the rights of the people. He has refused for a long time, ere such dissolutions, to cause others to be elected, whereby the legislative powers, incapable of annihilation, have returned to the people at large for their exercise, the state remaining in the meantime exposed to all the dangers of invasion from without and convulsions within. He's not helping the people at all. So right there, we're seeing everything that's happening today in our current administration. The king was doing it. Open borders, not protecting us, not answering the call, not true representation with the government. All of those things are happening. That's what those first 4 or 5 have said, okay? He has endeavored to prevent the population of these states, for that purpose obstructing the laws for naturalization of foreigners, refusing to pass others to encourage their migrations hither, and raising the conditions of new appropriations of lands. So he's hurting the absolute population growth of this country by not allowing people to either gain citizenship by moving here or, becoming naturalized citizens. He's stopping that. He has obstructed the administration of justice by refusing his assent to laws for establishing judiciary powers. So he's trying to take control of everything. He has obstructed the he has made judges dependent on his will alone. So he's picked the judges for the tenure of their voices and the amount and payment of their salaries. He has erected a multitude of new voices and sent hither swarms to harass our people and eat out their substance. He has kept among us in times of peace standing armies without the consent of our legislatures. He has acted to render the military independent and superior to the civil power. He has combined with others to subject us to a jurisdiction foreign to our Constitution and acknowledged by our laws, giving his assent to their acts of pretended legislation, for quartering large bodies of armed troops among us, for protecting them by mock trial from punishment for any murders which they should commit on the inhabitants of these states, for cutting off our trade with all parts of the world, for imposing taxes on us without our consent, for depriving us in many cases of the benefits of trial by jury, for transporting us beyond seas to be tried for pretended nuances, for abolishing the free system of English laws in a neighboring province, establishing therein arbitrary government and enlarging its boundaries so as to render it at once an example and fit instrument for introducing the same absolute rule into these colonies. There's a mouthful right there. For taking away our charters, abolishing our most valuable laws, and altering fundamentally the forms of our governments, for suspending our own legislatures and declaring themselves invested with power to legislate for us in all cases whatsoever. Again, he's taking away all their rights to representation, to trial by jury. He's deciding across the pond what is going on in our country and who's to be punished. And then he's making it very hard for them to defend themselves and bringing them to all kinds of crazy places. He's quartering troops within our land, within our houses, without approval of the landowner. He's saying that we can't own land. These are all things that are happening, and all of these people are going through these boxes of freedom, trying to declare their freedom. In the end of the Declaration of Independence as well, they actually touch on some of the hot topics of slavery and everything else. So hear me out here for a second. He has abdicated government here by declaring us out of his protection and waging war against us. He has plundered our seas, ravaged our coasts, burnt our towns, and destroyed the lives of our people. He is at this time transporting large armies of foreign mercenaries to complete the works of death, desolation, and tyranny already begun with circumstances of cruelty and perfidy, scarcely paralleled in the most barbarous ages and totally unworthy of the head of a civilized nation. He has constrained our fellow citizens taken captive on the high seas to bear arms against their country, to become the executioners of their friends and brethren, or to fall themselves by their hands. He has excited domestic insurrections amongst us, and has endeavored to bring on the inhabitants of our frontiers the merciless Indian savages whose known rule for warfare is an indistinguished destruction of all ages, sexes, and conditions. In every stage of these oppressions we have petitions for redress in the most humble terms. Our repeated petitions have been answered only by repeated injury. A prince whose character is thus marked by every act which may define a tyrant is unfit to be the ruler of a free people. Nor have we been wanting to attentions to our British brethren. We have warned them from time to time of attempts by their legislature to extend an unwarrantable jurisdiction over us. We have reminded them of the circumstances of our immigration and settlement here. We have appealed to their native justice and magnanimity, and we have conjured them by the ties of our common kindred to disavow these usurpations which would inevitably interrupt our connections and correspondence. They too have been deaf to the voice of justice and of consanguinity. We must, therefore, acquiesce in the necessity which denounces our separation and hold them, as we hold the rest of mankind, enemies in war and peace friends. We, therefore, the representatives of the United States of America in General Congress, assembled, appealing to the Supreme Judge of the world for the rectitude of our intentions, do, in the name and by the authority of good people of these colonies, solemnly publish and declare that these united colonies and of right ought to be free and independent states, that they are absolved from all allegiance to the British crown, and that all political connection between them and the state of Great Britain is and ought to be totally dissolved, and that as free and independent states, they have full power to levy war, conclude peace, contract alliances, establish commerce, and to do all other acts and things which independent states may of right do. And in support of this declaration, with a firm reliance on the protection of divine providence, we mutually pledge to each other our lives, our fortunes, and our sacred honor. And then we have the signers of the Declaration of Independence. 13 states unanimously approved the Declaration of Independence to divorce the king from our country, to establish our own rights, our own freedoms, to not have to answer to anyone, to answer to our own free will, to create our own government, to have true representation, to not be taxed for things that we saw the Pine Tree riots, we saw the Boston Tea Party, we've seen all of these things that we don't even learn in school anymore, and this is what we were up against. The 4 boxes of freedom, right? The soapbox, the ballot box, okay, the jury box, all of those were being manipulated and used and abused by a king across the ocean who was abusing and terrorizing and was tyrannical against the people of the United States. And we had a select few, a small percentage of our population, saw what this was, did not fall prey to the church and hearing Romans 13, we should just abide and live by it. They stood up and saw that, resistance to that tyrannical rule was obedience to God. So today, we see women standing up across this country, women, as we see the men, because they see the storm. You've seen me say this in speeches. My wife can see a pile of manure 4 miles away, and I will be standing in the middle of it and won't see it. God has blessed our women with the gift of intuition and seeing what's on the horizon. They see the storm on the horizon. So men, as I go to these patriot groups, I see 75% of them are filled with women who are seeing what's happening in this country and want to stand for it because they see what's happening to their children in the schools. They see what's happening to their future grandchildren that aren't even here yet. They're standing, and they're waiting for the men to stand up and join them. And the men right now have been demasculated for the last 20 or 30 years, playing video games. We're sitting at home playing video games. We're doing these things. We are continuing to destroy our military from within. We're destroying our country from within. It is time for us to stand and fight for this country. We need to stand and enact all 3 of the boxes of freedom. And as you heard in the Declaration of Independence, our forefathers were tired and they have enacted all 3 of those boxes, and they stepped to the 4th box, and that was the ammo box. And that's what brought on the revolution. And I'm not calling for you to do that today, but I am saying it's time to stand and start acting these 3 boxes because it means something. And that's what we need to do. And that's what we all need to do. And we need to step up and do that. So I'm going to finish this. And as you look at a flag, as you look at the stars and stripes, and they're going to be all over the place this weekend. One, I want you to focus on something. Take a look at this. As you see the stars and stripes, you can see that cross that's in the middle of those stars and stripes. This is a David Bray shirt. Big fan of his. He was a Devil Doc. I'm a Marine. He was in the Navy, but he was a Doc. If you know, you know. So David Bray, thank you. Hopefully you get to see this video. This is my favorite shirt of all time. Okay? But as you look at those stars and stripes, I want you to remember the Star Spangled Banner. And I want you to remember this story. I'm going to tell you a story. Where the Star Spangled Banner came from. So all those homeschoolers or all those folks that are getting here into the video. In 1814, we were in brutal war of the War of 1812. The British again. We had won our independence 25 years earlier. War of 1812. There was a lot of fighting, a lot of bloodshed, a lot of fighting for our freedom. And there were prisoners taking on both sides. And they called upon a young lawyer by the name of Francis Scott Key to go have a conversation with the naval admiral of the British Navy to do a one-for-one. The deal was to do a one-for-one swap of prisoners because we had captured British and they had captured Americans. So the British fleet was out in the harbor of Baltimore, not far from where I am now, off the coast of Fort McHenry, which is down in Baltimore, 1,000 yards offshore. And there were prisoners held on those ships. So Francis Scott Key goes out and garners a decision with the admiral that they were going to do a one-for-one swap. And they agreed upon this, and it was coming up, it was getting late in the afternoon, and Francis Scott Key goes down to the hold and he sees unfathomable distress of humanity, prisoners in cages and feces, and just picture the worst of the worst things with men piled on top of each other in the hold of a ship as prisoners. And he got down there and he said, "Men, I've arranged your release. You're going home tonight." And there was an uproar, and it was fantastic, and everybody was elated. And Francis Scott Key stepped back up on the ship's surface, and he's talking to the admiral, and the admiral comes up to him and says, "Well, there's been a change of plans." I don't know exactly what his words were, but this meeting has been moot. As of tomorrow, all of you are going to be, free, but you'll be under the rule of Britain again. Francis Scott Key is like, "What are you talking about?" He said, tonight, Fort McHenry will fall. And when it falls, the war will be over and everyone will no longer be a prisoner. We'll have no need to be fighting anymore. So there won't be any need for a prisoner exchange because Fort McHenry will fall tonight. And Francis Scott Key is like, "What are you talking about? How is that even possible?" And the admiral said, Take a look on the horizon. You see those little dots on the horizon? That is the full force of the British fleet, our naval fighting force. And they're going to be here within 2.5 hours. We've already informed Fort McHenry that they are going to be bombarded by the full force of the British Navy in a few hours. And the war will be over. And Francis Scott Key goes, "You can't do that. That's not a fighting fort. That's a fort filled with women and children. This is not a fortified fort. It's, what's the sense?" And the admiral said, "Well, we've given them an out. You see that flag up on the rampart there? All they have to do is lower that, and we won't even fire a single shot. But we will bombard that until that flag comes down. And when that flag comes down, we'll know that you have, secured your surrender, and the war will be over." So there's the out. So a couple hours, Francis Scott Key goes down in the hold of the ship, and he tells the men what's going on. And he says, and as twilight starts to come and there's a sunset, the bombardment starts on the fort. And the men are yelling up from the holds, "What's going on up there? What's going on? What's going on?" And Francis Scott Key's yelling down, "It still holds. It still holds." "No, say, can we see by the dawn's early light what so proudly we hailed at twilight's last gleaming." So as they watched as twilight's last gleaming, the flag was standing tall on the rampart. 3 hours of bombardment. The admiral says to Francis Scott Key, and they can see the rocket's red glare is lighting up the flag, and it's still standing. And the admiral says to Francis Scott Key, "I don't understand why they haven't surrendered yet. This bombardment has been something the likes of this world has never seen, and yet the flag still holds. And my scouts say that flag has been hit directly multiple times, and it still stands. Why won't they just drop it? What is it with these Christian Americans?" And Francis Scott Key answered him because he had heard George Washington say at one time, or didn't hear him say, but had heard that he had said, that the Christian American would rather die fighting on his 2 feet than live serving on his knees. And that is the moral aptitude of America. Freedom, the beacon on the hill, the flag on the rampart, from sea to shining sea across this great world where people come here to be free. And after that, Francis Scott Key said that the admiral directed his entire fleet to direct all fire directly at the flag, nothing else, just the flag, because he couldn't believe that those people were dealing with such turmoil and explosions in that fort that he just wanted to direct it at the flag so the fighting and the bombardment would just stop. The humanity would just, that he could have some sense of humanity in himself of the destruction that he was witnessing before him. So he just directed his entire fleet to call fire upon just the flag, just the rampart. Francis Scott Key was said that he could hear the prisoners in the hold just praying loudly, "Please let the flag just hold. Let it just hold." Because they knew what freedom was, and they weren't going to give it up willingly. And though they were in a cell, they were sitting there praying that the flag would hold. At dawn's early light, the fog, the bombardment had stopped. The flag was there. It was off kilter. It was leaning to the side, but it was still standing, to the amazement of all. To the cheers of the prisoners, to the amazement of Francis Scott Key, where he takes a boat and he goes back to shore. And the first place he went was Fort McHenry. And he went back to Fort McHenry and he found what was going on. Surely this flag should have fallen. And what he found was that indeed the flag had been hit multiple times, direct hit. And when it was picked back up and held by men who knew that freedom and that flag meant more than even their lives. And they stood there and they held that pole until they died. And their bodies were removed and more men came in and held that flag upright, knowing what was going to happen. And when Francis Scott Key saw the flag off kilter, he said that the flag was being held by the bodies of true patriots. As you see the flag, you see those men and women fighting for their independence. They stood tall. They knew what liberty and freedom meant. They understood it. We have forgotten that today. And so I hope today as you watch this and you learn and you see the emotion within me, why we drape a flag over a fallen soldier's casket. Because they were fighting for that freedom. Not just for you, not just for me, but for those in the world that don't understand what freedom truly is. We have forgotten what freedom is here. We have forgotten. Every moment that we allow our freedoms to be taken from us, every moment that we allow a mandate to dictate what we can and can't do, to allow a government to continue to drive our lifestyles and to change us and to decide medical freedom and decide whatever, you put a label on it. Look what has happened the last couple of years. We are absolutely under tyrannical rule right now. And we've given it up willingly. We need to get some intestinal fortitude. We need to stand up and we need to say no. We need to realize that we are the majority. We are the ones in the majority that want to keep our freedom, to want to have freedom. The old adage of the grasshopper and the ant. The moment that the ants realize that they outnumber the grasshopper 1,000,000-1, the grasshopper loses and the ants gain power. The Declaration of Independence gave us that power in the beginning. The Constitution is giving us that power now. The Supreme Court is giving us back our freedoms through some of their decisions just of recent through those freedoms and what we are born with, inalienable rights. Don't let them go. Pick them up. Grasp them in your hand. Stand tall. Stand tall, speak truth, say no, no more. You are the majority. Represent yourself. Speak, seek the truth. May we turn and realize that we are a great nation because we are under God. We are a great nation because of God and his rules, not because of who we are and what we've done, and not because of the rule of man. And right now we are trying to follow the rule of man. Stand tall. Stand firm. Embrace freedom. Embrace your neighbor. Embrace your family. Do not allow any more freedoms to go. As Reagan said, freedom is just one generation away from being lost. Let it not be this generation. Enjoy your 4th of July. Enjoy your Independence Day and keep it and work for it and be willing to bleed or die for it as our forefathers and our ancestors have done, because that is what it is truly worth. That is what it is worth to this entire world, not just this great nation. Because we are a beacon on the hill. We are a lighthouse. We are that flag on a rampart that must forever stand. God bless all of you. May God bless America. And may we all stand for our independence and bless God again with America. God bless all of you. Happy Independence Day.